Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome. My name is Browne Kennedy. I'm the Managing Director of Clearstream Solutions, and you're here for the Sustainable Packaging virtual event, which is part of the MODOS program and part of Local Enterprise Week 2021. I know that the team at MODOS and DCC specifically went out and researched what the stakeholders would be interested to hear about as a topic, and sustainable packaging was the topic that came out top of the list. It's no wonder during these times of COVID lockdowns, as our green bins are overflowing with packaging. We used to think that was a good thing, that we had more product to be recycled. Now we're all looking to reduce. So great that this topic is getting such attention. We're going to try over the next hour to all you ever wanted to know about packaging, sustainable packaging, but we're afraid to ask. It's a big subject, it's a challenging subject, but hopefully we'll do justice to that. I'm joined today by an expert panel and expert panel of speakers also, and I'll introduce them in due course. But I'd first like to hand over to Mary McSweeney. And Mary is leading the team here as the Senior Executive Officer and Deputy Head of Economic Development at Enterprise at Dublin City Council. So Mary, you're very welcome, and please, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Browne, and great to be here with you this evening for another exciting MODOS event, and as part of our suite of events for a National Enterprise Week. So all week across the country, across the 31 local enterprise offices, we've over 200 virtual events happening. And part of what Michaela and the team who are leading MODOS are looking to do is to have the MODOS and circular economy and green business events mainstreamed into the programme of supports for small and medium enterprises in the Dublin region. Also, the week kicked off with a new green business support that the local enterprise offices have developed called Green for Micro. So part of our work in the local enterprise offices is to signpost people to supports that are available. So we're delighted to have this event as part of the MODOS suite. For those of you who haven't come across MODOS, a few years ago we started to work with Joanne Rourke in the Eastern Midlands Regional Waste Planning Office. And Joanne had identified the need to engage with businesses to affect the changes needed. As Browne has outlined, we've a big challenge with the EU Green Deal and climate action. So if we don't support our businesses, how are we going to make the transition? So last year we got to expand MODOS to a Dublin region and national offering. And this year we have further supports as part of the MODOS programme. So if you're inspired today after this event, we'd be delighted for you to go on to modos.ie, where you'll find more details of a mentoring and an innovation programme that is open for applications up until the 16th of March. Michaela will talk to us at the end of the event with a bit more details on it. So I'd just like to thank the Browne Kennedy and the other expert people that we've met along the MODOS journey, to thank each of you for being here this evening, and to thank Michaela and Anya and Melissa who've worked hard on putting this evening's event together. So I'm delighted to hand back to you, Browne, and looking forward to hearing from each of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And we've had the pleasure of being one of the coaches on the MODOS program through our SUSTUB division. And all I can say is that you've already addressed a number of the key issues that participants were looking for. And one was that financial support. So it's great that the LEOs are now providing those vouchers for companies, because very often small companies don't have the financial resources, but plus also the mentoring support and the network support that you're offering for issues like packaging, the financial and the time. This is a challenge, so great that support is there. Packaging is an interesting, I mean, my own background, I've had print and packaging. I started out in the IDA in the print and packaging division. And one of the reasons I set up Clearstream was because of a tender for print and packaging when a client asked us about the sustainability in our print and packaging. This is about 15 years ago. We had no clue what sustainability in print and packaging meant back then. So fast forward 15 years, and we have an expert group here now talking about sustainability in packaging. And when we talk about sustainability, we very often talk about the competitive advantage that it drives. So your packaging is in the hands of your customers. It's an opportunity to communicate with them, but also if it litters, it becomes a problem and your brand and product can be impacted. The customers care, the consumers. Niall's going to talk to us about what the retailers and the customers and the consumers. Packaging is one of those issues. Even though it may not be the biggest issue from a climate change perspective, it is a massive issue from a littering perspective. And the consumer has a concern about packaging. And again, we'll talk about the role of packaging, because packaging in many cases helps us to achieve some environmental goals. So it's a complex and multifaceted issue, and hopefully we'll do justice to that today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker today. And in the terms of transparency and openness and honesty, he is a colleague of mine, Niall. Niall joined us last year at Clearstream, and Niall is an expert in LCA. In fact, he's been working on some very interesting projects. He's our circular economy and LCA program lead at Clearstream. But having completed his sustainable energy and green technology course at UCD, he did a master's focused on economic analysis. And for those of you who are interested in how do you get into this business, Niall had worked on a special project around how to turn seaweed into food safe bioplastic. And that was of great intrigue to me and us at Clearstream. And as I said, it's great to have Niall on the team. So Niall is going to give us a context over the next 10 minutes or so. So over to you, Niall.
Thanks very much, Brian. Just share my screen.
Sorry, I should mention before you start, we are recording the session, so we will be sharing the details afterwards if anybody's looking for it. So thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so as Brian mentioned, my name's Niall Collins. I'm the Circular Economy and LCA Program Manager at Clearstream Solutions. And today I'm just going to basically run through briefly the trends, both regionally and nationally, that we've come down the line in recent times with regards to packaging and development circular economy. And also looking at the packaging system. And as Brian mentioned, the functions of packaging, as because packaging does have a vital role when it comes to protecting the product. And when you're looking at your packaging system, to consider the overall whole system in a holistic manner, because it's vital to consider all aspects, because it's going to be a system change when it comes to packaging. We'll also introduce then that sustainable packaging thinking and what it actually means when you say sustainable packaging, and then also the kind of important aspects that we do here at Clearstream Solutions in that impact measurement in products, but also at packaging level. So we've seen both regionally and nationally the drive towards a circular economy, with EU bringing out the Circular Economy Action Plan and also an EU strategy for plastics in the circular economy, with I suppose the outcry from plastic pollution and that tangible impact people can see. And also in Ireland nationally, the Waste Action Plan for the Circular Economy, which was published in 2020, which followed suit to the Circular Economy Action Plan. So again, they're focused on the recyclability and reusability of that of packaging by 2030, and within the EU, looking to extend and modernise the recycling facilities, and also looking to innovative materials and alternative feedstocks. So there's like the bio-based plastics or bio-based materials, compostable materials. And so, but again, vital to look at that as a system perspective and see if there's any issues regards to the sustainability of those materials. And the movement away from plastics and improving the packaging issue, you can also be seen with regards to an EU tax now being introduced on non-recyclable plastic packaging in Jan 2021. Again, more clarity is required on this, but it's clearly the movement is away from plastics and away from the packaging and more towards that circular economy aspect. So integrating the circular economy aspects. And also, I just wanted to introduce I suppose taking a big stand on this is retailers with regards to Tesco, Aldi, SuperValu. They've all made commitments in regards to their own brand packaging, but also moving towards their branded products within their stream. So they've looked at, again, that circular economy aspect. So recyclability, reusability and compostable materials within their system. So these commitments clearly show the movement away from single use and towards that circular economy when it comes to packaging materials. And as I mentioned, it's important to consider the packaging system as a whole, as it requires a system outlook in order to make a vital change. So you can't just change one aspect of that system and hope that everything goes swimmingly. You need to look at the system and make sure any change you make along that system is it makes an improvement and also doesn't cause any unintended consequences in any other area of that system. before briefly, I just want to speak about that functions of packaging. And as Brian mentioned, packaging does have a vital role when it comes to transporting and containing that product, protecting a product, preserving a product, and something that plastic's been very successful at regards to preserving, say, food and extending food life. Also providing that convenient way of life and how we've kind of dealt with compostable cups and disposable cups for a cup of coffee, for example. But it's also an important media to put on information in regards to the products, also maybe the company's vision regards to sustainability and selling that kind of overall story in regards to your company and your sustainability goals. It's a nice media to actually have that and to reach your consumers. So again, when you are looking at packaging, you need to consider the functions your packaging has with regards to your product and ensure that any change you make, the functions are maintained and doesn't cause any unintended consequences. So from that systems perspective, then you need to consider the packaging within your organization. So a lot of people focus on that primary packaging aspect, so the packaging that's in direct contact with the product itself, such as a bottle of water here. But also you need to look at your secondary packaging. So again, that external packaging, maybe that might just go to your customer, such as a shrink wrap here of all the bottles. And also that transit and tertiary packaging and how those secondary units here are delivered to your customers. So when you are looking at packaging, you need to consider your whole outlook within your organization and how that packaging is functioned. And when you consider this outlook, you then can highlight maybe areas where you might be able to achieve quick wins with reduction, or areas maybe that might have might cause problems in the future, and then you can then develop a pathway and a plan to actually reduce that packaging. But also you need to consider that life cycle of the packaging. So as I mentioned, maybe changing one aspect within that life cycle of your packaging may have unintended consequences upstream or downstream of that life cycle. So you're looking at a kind of cradle to grave outlook from your packaging. So where is that material sourced, the manufacturer, how was it manufactured, where is it distributed, and how far did it have to travel to you at that use phase as well? Does it provide the same functions and does it protect your product, for example? And also that disposal. So is it managed appropriate end of life? There's no point in having a compostable material if it actually doesn't actually end up in the right waste stream, or if the infrastructure isn't there for that compostable material to be broken down at end of life. So these all need to be factored into your decision when you're looking at sustainable packaging and when you are considering addressing your packaging needs. So now we just move on to that sustainable packaging thinking. So again, so what is sustainable packaging when we say sustainable packaging, and what do we need to consider? And again, when we are thinking about sustainable packaging, we like to think of kind of 3 pillars here. So you want to look at material components. Is it responsibly sourced? The complexity of materials. So is it how many materials are used within your packaging? How many polymers, for example, which may have issues again at end of life. So this kind of looks at the design phase. This kind of looks at the design phase and maybe improvements you can do upstream. And then also, as I mentioned, that life cycle impact. So that cradle to grave from extraction all the way to disposal, and any impacts or challenges that may arise from changing from one packaging to another, or any improvements that you may make. But also looking beyond maybe the kind of typical life cycle assessment impacts that we can address, and considering the wider impact metrics when it comes to packaging, such as recyclability, renewability, and for example. And then also the end of life management, which Brian will speak about after my presentation. And again, that focus on circularity and closing the loop when it comes to end of life management. And again, coming back to that compostable cup, so is it actually getting composted? Because yes, that compostable cup may be low carbon and can be managed appropriately at end of life, but if it's not managed appropriately at end of life, it actually can have a higher impact. So again, it's focusing on that circular economy, maybe your messaging when it comes to your packaging, and how can you actually improve this end of life management. So again, as I mentioned, that sustainable packaging has a range of metrics that you can consider. Again, like locally sourced, is it easy to recycle, is it reusable, that low carbon footprint, is it volumetrically efficient to improve logistics, and again, that communication of your sustainability message. And again, looking at your supplier, so looking upstream, is your supplier of your packaging also have the same values as you? Are they trying to improve their sustainability within their organization? And again, as there's so many range of metrics when it comes to packaging, there can be potential for trade-offs. So there can be one change to another packaging can have impacts. So you need to ensure that you understand what these impacts are, and maybe how can you mitigate certain impacts. And an important part about it is measuring these impacts. So for example, the environmental impacts, maybe the increased greenhouse gas emissions from a switch from one to another, or maybe the poor use behavior at a consumer end of the reusable packaging, and it's not being reused, it's just being reused once, but then you're nearly better off sticking with single use, and then increasing the weight of transport. And again, those social impacts, so the hygiene issues with recycled material, reusable solutions, how can you actually mitigate issues around the hygiene issues and improve your system in regards to that, and that consumer end of life confusion. So how can you communicate how your packaging should be managed at end of life to your consumer to ensure that it is managed appropriately at end of life. And at a Clearstream solution, we look at that measurement of these unintended consequences. So you're looking again at those LCA kind of metrics with regards to energy, CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, but also the wider impact. So you want to consider your current option against maybe an alternative A to an alternative B, and how they compare against each other and which one is the better option to go with. And then also looking at the product or system redesign. So if you step into that kind of packaging impact measurement mark, and considering those trade-offs, and how can you actually make an informed decision when you're considering your packaging. So again, I suppose coming from the carbon aspect and looking at, you can't improve what you don't measure. So you need to ensure that you're looking at your packaging footprint and understanding that baseline. And again, that filters back into that system perspective. So not just looking at your primary packaging, but also considering secondary and transit, and how improvements can be made across your whole packaging footprint. And again, looking beyond the carbon, so the littering impact, maybe the water pollution or renewable content of that material. And within Clearstream, we have certain tools to actually improve, to measure these impacts. So we have a PEAT tool, which is a screening kind of streamlined LCA, which gives you an indication of certain packaging and how it compares to an alternative in a shorter space of time that maybe a full-blown LCA might need to take. And then also a scorecard or development stage where we can consider all these metrics in a scorecard development and score them based on how to perform in each category, and then compare it against an alternative also scored by the similar scorecard. And this can be varied between client to client. So this is just an output to give you an example of the output you would receive from the PEAT tool. So you have a CO2 example here, which gives you impact of your materials, your processing, and also your transport and disposal, your energy demand, and your water usage and materials processing, transport. And also look at the volume ratio and weight ratio, which will have obviously an impact on your transport and your logistics from pack to product ratio. It also gives you footprint equivalent. So I suppose easy to digest and understandable metrics than just say kgs of CO2. So you've like kilometers in an average family car, or when it comes to energy, households, annual energy, electricity usage, or water, average shower use. And so it allows it kind of to break it down and be a lot more easier for people to understand. And that scorecard development, as you mentioned, there's a lot of kind of metrics outside the LCA and outside what LCA can measure, such as recycle rate and recycle content. We consider that in kind of a scorecard type system and score the packaging based on a score from 1 being the worst up to 5, and depending on how well it performs, you score it here. And that can be compared against an alternative scored on the same scorecard. And again, important here is you can weight these categories and change these categories depending on your preference as an organization and what you intend to move, what your target is or your policy is when it comes to packaging and moving towards more sustainable packaging. So that's me. So thanks very much for everybody. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact at Niall at clearstreamsolutions.ie or the wider team at Clearstream Solutions. So I'll pass it on to Browne.
Thank you, Niall. There was a question coming in there about the recognition of the tool, which we'll come back and answer to. I'd love to get into the conversation with you about how some retailers are pushing compostable and why others are looking at recyclable, but we might come back to that again if we have time. I'm just conscious of time and moving on to our next speaker, who is Brian Walsh. Brian is a packaging technologist specialist at Repak, where he's responsible for the management and implementation of Repak's packaging waste prevention program. He's a genuine expert in this area, and he advises manufacturers and retailers on packaging optimization and packaging waste prevention initiatives, both in-house and on-site. And he's over 16 years of experience working within the food, manufacturing and packaging engineering. And there's some really excellent, interesting tools that Repak have to share with us. So over to you, Brian. We can see your screen, perfect. You might still be on mute. You are, I think you're on mute there. You're just on mute, Brian. Can somebody unmute him, or does he have to do it himself? Very good.
Apologies for that. Thanks very much, Brian, for that introduction. Great compliments in there. I'm not sure I deserve them, but thanks anyway. First of all, can everyone see my screen? I just need to move the slideshow. Can you see that there? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
Great. Excellent. So thanks very much to the team in Dublin City Council and everyone involved in today's event for the invitation. Very much appreciated. What I'm going to do, I suppose, is run through a number of different things. I won't assume everyone on the call understands what Repak is or what it does. So I'll just give you a very quick introduction to that. Cover a little bit on the EU packaging policy. Niall's obviously covered a bit of that, so won't get too much into the detail, but just to give you a little bit of background in terms of what it means for recycling targets and the implications then that fall back on producers in relation to that. A little bit on the plastics challenge and some of the work that's going on in the background there. And also some design guidance that we've recently developed for businesses, which they can access on the Repak website. Also, waste prevention obviously forms quite a significant part of what we try to do in avoiding unnecessary material being placed on the market. Obviously, that helps in relation to a number of different issues. So I'll touch a little bit on that. And some resources and supports then that we also provide people who are members of Repak. So just to give you a quick introduction, so Repak really was set up as a direct result of the packaging waste directive. So we're in business now since 1997, and basically we cover the legal obligation of producers who place more than 10 tons of packaging on the Irish market and have a turnover of over €1 million. So once you reach that threshold, you basically, under the legislation, have an obligation to help fund the recycling system. Just to give you an overview of what that has actually achieved. Back in the mid-90s, we were sitting on a recycling rate for packaging of around 15%. And that has gone up to 64% when you look at just recycling from material back into new products. And then if you include recovery through waste to energy, we're at around 94% at the moment. That has helped to divert over 11 million tons of packaging that would have otherwise ended up in a landfill. It's helped us meet all of the targets set out by the EU in relation to that, and it's created over 5,000 jobs. The other knock-on impact is that it's actually helped to close down numerous landfills around the country, because obviously there's a lot less municipal waste now going into those. So they've gone from 126 down to around 3. It also helps to fund the likes of bottle banks outside of your supermarket or your civic amenity sites, where you can go to discard anything in relation to bulky items you might have at the household level. It's also invested over €400 million into recycling, and a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know this fact, that it's also helped to fund the actual recycling bins outside your door. It also has a significant CO2 impact, because obviously those materials that are now being recycled otherwise would have had newly extracted materials from the earth, were it not to be the case. There's just a little bit then on the EU policies. Obviously Niall has gone through a little bit of this already, but this just goes to show in relation to the circular economy package and how that has resulted in a number of different pieces of legislation. Just to point out a couple of those, which I'll go through in a little bit more detail. You have the PPWD, which is the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. As a result of that, plus the plastic strategy, there's a number of changes now in relation to how packaging will need to be reported to Repak, but also in terms of how we disincentivize non-recyclable materials through tools such as eco-fee modulation. So the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive targets. So what you'll see there on this graph is you'll see in green basically what the targets were for 2008. And in the blue, you will see what those targets are for 2025, and then your purple is 2030. So what you'll see is in relation to Ireland that we already meet a large number of these targets, even out as far as 2030 in some cases when you take into account things like metals and glass. But you can see where the big challenge arises in relation to plastic materials. So it's at 31% recycling at the moment. If you put on top of that the recovery element, it adds up to over 90%, but that recovery element can no longer be counted within the new Packaging Waste Directive. So what are we doing about that? So in 2018, we launched our plastic strategy, and that has 4 key goals. The first of those is in relation to meeting those recycling and circular economy targets. The second one is really around promotion of better eco-design of plastic packaging, encouraging reuse and recycling, and also doing more in terms of the education of consumers around sustainable consumption. So as a result of that, in 2018, we also launched our pledge on plastic packaging waste, which has 5 key objectives. Number 1 is around minimization of avoidable single-use packaging and promoting reuse. The second is around helping to deliver and asking businesses within our membership to help deliver the plastic recycling targets, basically through trying to recycle more on their site. The third was around simplifying polymer use and eliminating non-recyclable components where possible. And again, things like food waste and shelf life obviously have to come into this. So we're not expecting things to change overnight in relation to how things are designed. The fourth, and very importantly, is in the incorporation of recycled content. Now, this is something that sits within the circular economy package, particularly for PET bottles or soft drinks bottles, whereby they have to have a certain level of recycled content. In our view, that's probably something that needs to extend beyond just one packaging format to really drive secondary market for materials. And the fifth one is really around ensuring that there's not unintended consequences here, because there are obviously related goals in relation to reduction of food waste, which also have to be taken into account. So just some of the key highlights from that pledge so far. We have 132 Repak members that have signed up to it to date. They've reported over 16,000 tons of material that would have been diverted from waste through the redesign that they've done. An average of 14.8% reduction in plastic packaging waste. And when I say reduction, obviously, again, it goes back to materials that are avoidable rather than materials that are necessary for shelf life or functionality. A number of key innovations, such as detectable black plastics, for example, and a number of projects that have proven that over 21,000 tons of recycled plastic has been incorporated into packaging and other components. We also have a working group, which is made up of a number of policy partners, such as the EPA, the Department of the Environment, and the Irish Waste Management Association. So when it comes to design for recycling, so obviously at the moment, one of the things that has been worked off in relation to this is the National Recycling List for Ireland. So all of these materials that are currently accepted in the recycling bin is what has been collected by the waste industry. We're looking at this with the various partners in the working group in relation to other materials and extending that out to other materials. And particularly there's a review at the moment in relation to soft plastics and how that gets dealt with at the household level. In terms of design, from a recycling consideration point of view, and again, a lot of this may seem quite simplistic, but it is the reality in relation to what is the most recyclable at the moment. And that comes down to things like simple materials, mono materials in relation to plastics, for example, easily identified and sorted. So, you know, the black plastic issue is a significant one, where it escapes detection by the equipment in sorting facilities at the moment and has to be picked by hand. Established collection system. You know, Niall made the point around compostables. It's very important that compostables are designed in a way that they can go through a composting facility and not be seen out the other side of it. So certification, for example, around that is very important. Easily processed. You know, there's a lot of packaging out on the market at the moment that cannot be emptied. You know, squeezy plastic bottles are a very good example, where they contain you know, quite thick sauces and things like that. So materials that are going to be contaminated, particularly with food going into a recycling facility, are not just an issue from a reprocessing point of view, but they're also an issue from a health and safety point of view as well. And end markets for recycling materials. This is a significant issue at the moment for plastics where they are low value, for example, because the price of oil is so low, it's very difficult to find markets for materials like that. In terms of packaging design, we recently launched a new packaging design guide, and it's an interactive guide whereby you can click on any of the tabs on the right hand side there and see the various design considerations and design tips in relation to them. The other thing that we did was we outlined on that guide exactly how material is treated during the material recovery facility at the sorting stage, so that people can see the sort of issues that arise. Just lastly, and very, very quickly, Repak also provide a service to member businesses called Prevent and Save. And there's a number of considerations that within that service that we help people with. You know, for example, when you're trying to identify target packaging projects, the top sellers obviously provide you with the greatest savings. Things that can be done at no or low cost without capital expenditure are obviously the ones to try and go for as their quick wins. And also anything that you're planning to redesign in the near future obviously provides you with an opportunity to look at your packaging overall and decide what can I do with it at this point to make it more sustainable. Another thing again, and Niall mentioned this as well, is this idea of a product versus packaging ratio. And that helps you identify whether or not there are excesses there. And there's a number of tools that you can use in relation to that that I'd be happy to discuss with anyone who's interested.
Thank you, Brian. Brian, that was excellent. Sorry, you have a summary?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to summarize there, but again, you know, it's just a matter of looking at your supplied packaging from your suppliers, what you're sending out to the market, any ways that you can reduce or minimize in-process packaging waste through lean techniques, any opportunities that you have there in terms of returnable or reusable packaging, and any support that you need in terms of designing for recycling. We'd be happy to expand on the design guide that's there. I've also included a number of additional slides, which I'll share, just gives people a kind of an idea of how to go about some of that. That's it. Thank you. Sorry about the time.
Good. Well, Brian, thank you very much. There's a bunch of questions coming in, which we'll come back to it. There's a question about deposit return scheme. There's a question about compostable versus biodegradable. So we will come back and try and address those. But I'm very keen to get on to our panel. Is when we talked with Michaela and the team about what sort of a panel we wanted to have, we said, well, we need to cover both the producer and the user, which is what we've done. And thankfully, I think we've two great examples. So one of the leading packaging companies in the world, and we all know about their Irish heritage, is a Smurfit Kappa group. So I'm delighted to have Gary Browne from Smurfit Kappa on with us. And we also have Benoit Nicol, who is the owner of Nature of Things. And I might start with you, Benoit. Benoit, you own a perfume company and you're an aromatherapy expert with 25 years of experience working in New York and I believe around the world in this area, with a product that's very sustainable. It's oils, aromatherapy, and you've identified a gap in the market for organic and ethically produced product. So we'd love to hear about that and how sustainability is important to you. And then maybe we'll come back to the packaging. So maybe you introduce your company and what you're doing from a sustainability perspective, and then we'll come back to the packaging piece.
Sure, thank you, Brian. So yes, I like you said, I've spent 25 years almost working in the perfume and essential oil industries, and I was lucky enough to travel around the world and see firsthand, you know, the source of these beautiful products, you know, the farm and operations, small distilleries, and I was kind of hooked by all these stories and all these beautiful environments, ecosystems that you see in these tropical countries, and that were a bit threatened in different ways, but a lot of sustainable solutions were emerging in that sector. You know, recycling by products of extraction or using sustainable energy sources and so on. So when I moved to Ireland and decided to create my company, I made, you know, sustainability a very strong pillar of the company. And I also, you know, was bringing my knowledge of the oils, their use and their qualities. So sustainability and qualities were the two main pillars of the company. I have to say that I had very little knowledge in packaging, you know, I did a lot of learning, and I still learn a lot at the moment. But I suppose my idea when I started was to focus on the product packaging. Obviously, I guess that's what's the most visible for my consumers, but also for me. I had you know, I wanted to have a beautiful packaging, and you know, but something also that was sustainable. So I'm using glass, obviously, but I'm still frustrated that I haven't been able to replace, for instance, some of the plastic caps on my bottles. And you know, what I want to convey here is that you know, you have to work on it step by step. You can't find, you know, right away the best solutions, but they will come in time. I'm sure of that. What I had overlooked, though, is that packaging is much more complex than that when you start a business. And so you have the packaging that comes in as well from your own suppliers. And for that, you know, solutions emerge when you start engaging them. You know, for instance, I had one of my suppliers that was packaging the products in the oils that were coming bulk to me in the best way, aluminum bottles. The feeders around the boxes was all made of recycled paper, and some other suppliers were sending the bottles in with a lot of plastic wrapping, you know, peanuts and so on. And so, you know, here it's just like, you know, telling the other supplier, listen, you know, there are other solutions for you to send me the products. Why don't you look at that? So another component of the packaging story is obviously around the shipping. You know, today especially with the pandemic, you see that you know, online business has blossomed and bloomed, and so shipping sustainably is also a very important part of what we turn our focus on. So in this case, you know, you work with your packaging solutions, like for instance, reducing fillers in the packaging boxes, you know, creating boxes that fit exactly your product, so you don't have to, you know, you know, there are a lot of solutions that you can create with cardboard now to optimize your packaging and minimize waste and minimize the packaging. So you know, you learn along the way and try to create solutions as you identify some problems. So I guess that's what I meant to say, you know, as an introduction.
Sorry, Benoit. That's really excellent, and we might come back and just tease through the steps that you went through, because that's, I suppose, for a lot of companies, and what Niall talked about is, you know, there's a bit of a transition here, and I love the way you engaged with your suppliers. And very often people think this is going to be more expensive, but actually when you engage with the suppliers early enough, they become part of the innovation, and a lot of suppliers are looking to sell and promote their sustainability. And if you give them enough notice and time and say, we can transition, we can work together. And I'd say, if I can move across to Gary, because I would say, Gary, that's a lot of what you guys are doing, is working with your clients to try and develop more sustainable solutions. So I'd love to hear just about yourself, your role, and what Smurfit, the Smurfit organization, Smurfit Kappa, are doing, because I know you're heavily involved in sustainability. So Gary, and I should introduce you properly. I guess you've been at Smurfit for 15 years as packaging designer and country coordinator, working with your clients on implementing new programs. You've studied packaging development at the University of the Arts in London and packaging technology at the Institute of Packaging. So another expert in packaging. So Gary, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Brian. You're very kind. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, because we're very actively engaged with our customers and the general public in terms of creating and improving the awareness about the issues that, you know, we're here today to speak about. Sustainability for us is something that is very much in our DNA. As I've said to many people before, I said, look, we started out as a company who chopped down trees. That's not a very eco-friendly activity, but from a very early stage in the company's development, we soon realized that, you know, that is not sustainable in itself. I don't believe myself that sustainability was actually a word or a business, you know, model back then, because we're talking very early 60s. So it's something that we had to do. And I think back then they might have just called it common sense, because that's really what it is. And we're trying to share that kind of sustainability insight and knowledge that we have with all companies and businesses and customers of ours out there, because they can make some real gains by making some changes. The earlier they do these things, the better it will be in the long term. We see the legislation coming down the line at us fast and hard, and it's only going to get more and more as the years go on. So there's no need or reason to delay. So we're actively involved with customers on several different levels, speaking about sustainability issues, obviously focused on the area of packaging. So that's where we are in relation to today.
I keep muting myself. Sorry, the Smurfit organization has a Better World, Better Planet program yourselves around packaging, and I know you're a very active participant in the CDP program. So you're disclosing your carbon and you're measuring your carbon emissions and your water and packaging impact. So does that help when you go to talk to your clients?
Absolutely. I mean, in response to a kind of a global reaction to what essentially was a David Attenborough program, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, the Blue Planet program, caused shockwaves globally about the kind of litter and problem that we're dealing with in terms of our marine life and our natural landscapes and so on. And companies wanted a reaction to this. They wanted to act more so now than ever. So we developed what we call Better Planet Packaging in response to that, where we basically just put all our knowledge in there. It's a kind of an encyclopedia that we have. It's a working campaign that we share with customers and businesses. We engage with colleges and universities out there to create and come up with some new ideas that we might overlook. Everything obviously we're doing is business focused. If we come up against a challenge or a problem, sometimes we throw it out there to universities and see if they can come up with some ideas that we might not have the right focus for. And yeah, everything about the way we're operating and doing business is all sustainability related, right the way through from our own paper mills. At the moment, up to 98% of the water that we use in our paper making process, and paper making is a very water intensive process. 98% of that water is returned back to nature directly from the mills in at least as good condition, most often better condition than it was taken from. It's the same with the wood and the trees that we chop down and convert into paper. It's all cyclical. It's a fully closed loop system now. Even the steam that's generated from the whole process is used further down the line to power and generate electricity for other elements of the process. So it's a fully cyclical system that we've got going on right away from the mills to our local plants as well.
Excellent, and that's important for your customers, I'm sure. Benoit, I know you talked about the challenges when you're going out to look for help, and we've a lot of questions coming here, a lot of technical questions coming in, which we'll try and address. But in terms of the technical issues, where do you go? Where did you go for help? I mean, you've put it out like there's 100 people or more on the call here today. Maybe we can all help, and everybody collectively can do that. But I heard Eamon Ryan talk today about this being a systemic change, but very often in our own little business worlds, we can't make those systemic changes. So where did you go for help, and how did you make some of those changes?
Well, I was probably turning my wife crazy, spending a lot of evenings on the internet trying to find, and that's how I started at the beginning. Like, you're just looking for solutions. Fortunately, now we have lots of information online, and with a few keywords, you can kind of narrow down and find some solutions if you're lucky. A better way very often is to use a local network. So I'm still lucky to be in a little kind of manufacturing building with lots of small companies, and we kind of help each other. Most of these companies have the same goal, trying to make, better and more sustainable products. So sometimes we exchange notes and contacts about, certain suppliers, and, you hear about, a more sustainable solution than so then you network with the local public, systems in Ireland. So, again, I took the MODOS program, and I'm now part of a little network of companies, in fact, that sometimes could be suppliers to me, or they can share some ideas and solutions. And yeah, so it's kind of an incremental, step-by-step process. I'd say the more important is really to look at the aspect of your business in regards to packaging, for instance, and say where you're quite good at, and where you have still some dark spots, and write them down. You have an Excel spreadsheet where have this packaging components that they're still marked as red, and I need to move them to green. And so I don't always find a solution right away, but I know that I'm going the right directions and making some progress. So it's really.
I think that network thing is very important, and again, I'm delighted that the Council and MODOS program have taken up that initiative to help people network and do what we're doing today to share that information. Brian, there's a lot of appetite out there for technical information. I've seen questions about embossing, and I've seen questions about biodegradable versus compostable, and we've seen questions about, I suppose, we'll talk about producer or deposit return. But you know, where should people go? Is there a place, you know, for best practice? Should they go to Repak? Should they talk to Smurfit? So who do they go to when they need information to talk about their product and packaging design?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the presentation, there is a design guide now available on the Repak website, and that I suppose attempts to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions that are out there. If there is anything that's not covered within that, or anyone wants to have a chat in general, I mean, they can give us a call. Obviously, you know, we act as a fairly good liaison between the businesses and the waste industry. So if there's anything that we're not sure of and we need to get more specific guidance from one of the waste contractors, we can also do that and can act as a central point, I suppose, in relation to it. I mean, if it's something very specific in relation to something like paper, for example, then yes, it may make more sense to go to someone like Smurfit if it's more of a technical specification type question, you know.
Yeah, very. And I think, having looked at the design guide, there's a couple of questions there about, you know, labels on aluminium and glass bottles, and it's very informative on that. It tells you whether that's, you know, not recommended or whether it's fine. It'll be washed out in the process. So again, I'd urge you to do that. But as Brian said, also talk to your suppliers. So I know, Gary, you guys have had a design group, so that you know, you do have customers coming to you talking about the design piece and how you can improve the design and make it more sustainable. Is that something that would be on offer to some of the producers on the call that would be interested in talking about how do I transition maybe from something that's plastic to a more sustainable board product?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of examples of that, success stories, as we like to call them, where customers approach us with, you know, whatever they're currently using at the minute. It may be some kind of plastic. They're maybe a little bit fearful that it's not the image that they want to project through their product at the moment. So they might want to move into paper packaging. So a lot of the work that we've done over the last couple of years has really been converting packaging in terms of moving from plastic to cardboard and to paper-based packaging. And we've got many, many examples of where that has worked and worked really well, and it continues to grow. And it's probably our biggest, as a business, it's our biggest growth area at the minute, which is no surprise in conjunction with e-commerce, which again, even the e-commerce sector, it's all about being sustainable e-commerce packaging. So there's an overlap there as well. So the sustainability and, you know, moving away from unrecyclable and, you know, unsustainable packaging materials is crossing over into every area, and it's being questioned at every point. So we're getting all sorts of queries coming at us from everywhere, not just here in Ireland, but we're experiencing the same thing on a global level. So this is very much a global movement that's happening around this at the minute. And we are working as a company to try and improve even the material that we can offer, increase the strength of it, increase the uses of it. We've looked into all sorts of crazy, you know, weird science type stuff behind paper. We've looked at the possibility of transparent paper and all this kind of stuff. So we're pushing, we're being pushed by our customers, and it's a great thing to see.
And are there places that people can go to see examples of those case studies that you're working on?
There are, yeah. We have an experience centre based in our Ballymount plant in Dublin, where we have, up until this time last year, been able to bring customers to visit, and we can sit down and we can do a half day and we can talk about the various packaging items that they're currently using. We can talk about anything to do with packaging or printing, various types of materials, and we have smaller versions of those centres in our other sites around the country. If there's a customer down in Cork, there's one in Cork, we have them in Northern Ireland as well. So yeah, we have these centres, and we're just dying to get them back open again and get people in.
Okay.
hopefully not too long away.
I'm not going to ask Brian about the legislative issue, because you're right in the middle of it, Brian. In that context, it would be somewhat unfair. But just maybe for Benoit, do you think, would it help to you if the legislation was pushing things, or do you derive a bit of a competitive advantage and a little bit of by being ahead of legislation and by maybe having a different approach?
I mean, we know that the legislation is coming and it's going to be, stricter and stricter. But I mean, I don't see really that way. I mean, I first want to be proud of what I'm doing and, creating beautiful products and sustainable products. So that's, I'm kind of, I'm trying to be greener. So that's the first motivation. Of course, there's definitely a recognition from the market or from the consumers, and when they see, they prefer to see cardboard packaging, for instance, so obviously than, something that's a mix of paper and plastic and other things that where they don't know how to recycle. Yes, my experience also is that, sustainability in packaging is not only a cost. It's also, it's an opportunity, again, on the market standpoint, but also, as I was saying earlier, creating, for instance, custom-made packaging for my shipping has helped me, process the shipments much quicker. There's no fillers anymore, so you reduce costs. You're more efficient. There are a lot of opportunities also on working on your packaging, and so I think it's important to see that it's not only a stick that's coming. It's also a lot of opportunities that are available for a lot of companies. So I would encourage anyone to look hard at their own packaging.
Okay, and Benoit, I know that you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, so I would encourage everybody to look at your site and the nature of things and your excellent products. And thank you as an example of it's a relatively small company that's doing a lot in the space to try and show your products in a sustainable way. That's really excellent. So if you have to drop off before I get a chance to thank you for that. Brian, can I just ask you about one that does come up all the time, is this the deposit return thing. Do you want to say anything about that? It's just in the context of, it does seem to be one that exercises people. If you're like me and when you were a kid you used to rob the bottles and bring them up to the local garage and get your 5 pence, it's intriguing as to why we don't have it. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the deposit return scheme forms part of the government's waste action plan for a circular economy out to 2025. So the plan at the moment is that it will happen as a result of that. They've set out a timetable, and quite an ambitious timetable in relation to that, which is looking at Q3 of 2022. So there has been the first stage of a public consultation by the Department of the Environment on that, and the second part of that public consultation is likely to happen by the end of this month. Actually, is what they're aiming for. Whether or not that happens, and then you'll have legislation around it probably by the middle of this year is what they're looking at. Again, quite ambitious. Whether it happens or not remains to be seen. But I mean, the justification for it really is the fact that within the single-use plastics directive, there's a 90% separate collection target in place for plastic bottles. In reality, the best way to hit that target is through something that incentivizes consumers to bring the bottles back, and the most proven way to hit the 90% plus is through a deposit return scheme. So it is in the plan, and it is likely to happen in the next 2 years or so anyway, I would say.
Brian, thank you very much. Look, I'm conscious of lots of great questions. We're going to leave the Q&A open so that we can answer some of these and maybe come back on them. There's some technical questions and some general questions. I'm conscious to do justice to the whole subject in 60 minutes is really challenging. So hopefully we'll have given you at least some insight into the tools and the process. I would say keep in touch with your suppliers, ask your customers, engage with people on the topic. Look at primary, secondary and tertiary, and look at trying to put some kind of measures in place so that you can try and prioritize the key areas, because there isn't a one fits all. There isn't a magic bullet here. Very often a plastic solution might very well be, for instance, in a reuse type of environment, a good solution. By and large, everybody's moving towards a more renewable materials. So, you know, lots of different factors to be taken into account. And hopefully we've given you some sources here. And it's great to hear that the chamber, both the Dublin City Council and MODOS program, that there is going to be funding through the LEOs for some of your work. I'm going to hand over briefly. So just want to thank Gary and Brian. We may stay on for a little minute. I just want to give Michaela an opportunity just to talk about some of the other programs of support that DCC are offering. So Michaela.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and thank you to all the speakers and to the participants for the very interesting conversation. I saw one of the questions coming up in the chat was about solutions, packaging solutions for micro businesses. And for instance, this is one of the supports that the Green for Micro will be offering, mentoring in that space, in that area. But also, if you're specifically interested in circular economy, as it was mentioned at the very beginning, we run MODOS, which is a circular economy program for micro, small and medium enterprises. We do training, we do events like this just to raise awareness around this kind of topics. And just yesterday, we launched a new initiative, which is the Modus Mentoring. It's a mentoring free of charge. You can apply up to 3 hours of mentoring. You just have to apply on the modus.ie website. I'm just gonna write all the contact details now in the chat box. And you have to return the application form by the 18th of March. The Modus Mentoring gives you access to the Modus Innovation Award, which gives you a chance to be rewarded and your circular economy projects with up to 2,500 euros. So we're really trying to grow this community of sustainable businesses and circular economy in Dublin and outside of the Dublin region as well. So please stay in touch. You can reach out to me and the rest of the team. I'm gonna write down my contact details in the chat function. Thank you very much.
Michaela, thank you. One of the things we'd love to have is some of the other stakeholders, the retailers and others to talk. I know a number of them have started to offer solutions around taking packaging off in stores and that. So there's a lot of innovation. All I'd say is we're all consumers. So you push back, you raise the issues if you're not happy about packaging with the stakeholders. It does matter, they do listen. And I think, so hopefully, again, as I said, big subject, we probably only touched on a fraction of it today, but just thank you all for participating. Thanks to the team, to Michaela and Mary and the team at Dublin City Council and MODOS for keeping these issues on the agenda. And yeah, if you need to, if you have any questions, we'll try and address the questions that you've asked in the chat directly, but please feel free to come to myself or Niall at Clearstream, or Brian has offered, and Gary has offered help from Smurfit as well. So thank you all. Stay safe. Sorry I ran over a few minutes, Michaela, but yeah, trying to get as much knowledge and info out of these guys as possible. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.